All right, today we're tackling a massive, century-old question that honestly is more relevant than ever. Can you actually plan an entire economy rationally from the top down? We're diving deep into the socialist calculation debate, an epic intellectual clash that really shook the foundations of economic thought.
So, to get our heads around this, let's start with a really basic question. Just look around you right now your phone, your desk, the room you're in. Somebody, somewhere, had to decide that making these specific things was a better use of time, energy, and materials than making, well, anything else. How in the world does that decision get made? And, the big one, could a single central planner make that choice for a whole society?
And that exact question, well, it's the beating heart of the socialist calculation debate. This wasn't some sleepy academic chat. This was a full-blown intellectual war over the very blueprint for how society should work. So here's a quick play-by-play of how it all went down. It kicks off in the 1920s when an economist named Ludwig von Mises basically threw down the gauntlet. He made this radical claim that rational economic planning under socialism wasn't just hard, it was literally impossible. Then, in the 30s, socialist thinkers like Oscar Lange fired back with their own clever models, and for decades, pretty much everyone agreed that Mises had lost the argument. But then, the 1990s happened, and history kind of forced everybody to dust off Mises' old ideas and give them a serious second look.
Okay, so let's really get into it. What was Mises' argument? Why was he so convinced that a planned economy was doomed to fail, not just in the real world, but even in theory?
Mises himself laid out the planner's absolutely mind-boggling job. The key word in that quote is infinite. You see, the planner isn't just picking between option A and option B. They have to wade through a literal infinity of possible projects to find the absolute best use for every single screw, every lump of coal, every hour of labor. I mean, the scale of that problem is just astronomical. To really prove his point, Mises came up with a thought experiment. He said, okay, let's just forget about all the usual problems. Forget corruption, forget greed, forget lazy planners. Let's imagine we have a perfect, godlike planner, a benevolent genius who knows every piece of technology, knows where every resource is, and has a population that will happily do whatever they're told. He wanted to strip away all the noise and focus on one single logical problem. Okay, so this perfect planner gets to work. First project, a new apartment building. And hey, to make the residents extra happy, the planner decides to build it using tons and tons of gold. Sounds pretty amazing, right? And of course, the people who get to live there are ecstatic. They can't stop singing the planner's praises. But here, and this is the absolute key to everything, Mises asks, just because you can build a golden apartment and just because it makes a few people happy, does that mean it was a good decision, economically speaking? And to answer that, we have to talk about a little something called opportunity cost. It's a simple but powerful idea. Every time you choose to do one thing, you're also choosing not to do something else. The value of that next best thing you gave up, that's the opportunity cost. If you spend an hour binge watching a show, the opportunity cost is whatever else you could have done with that hour. Read a book, go for a run, you name it. And this is where the planner's problem just comes into razor-sharp focus. On one hand, you've got these super luxurious apartments for a few hundred lucky people. Awesome. But on the other hand, look at what society sacrificed. All the other things that gold could have been used for. We're talking wedding rings, critical parts in our phones and computers, even dental fillings. The planner gave up all those other valuable uses. So, how does the planner know if they made the right trade-off? That's the billion-dollar question. In a market economy, prices give you the answer. The price of gold isn't arbitrary. It reflects its scarcity and how much millions of people value it for thousands of different uses. Without market prices for gold, steel, wood, and labor, the planner is missing that essential yardstick. They have no common unit to do the math. They are, quite literally, unable to calculate if the value they created was worth more than the value they destroyed. Now, you can bet that an argument this big got a huge reaction. Socialist thinkers didn't just roll over. They came back with several proposed solutions to this whole calculation problem. And well, Mises had a response for every single one. Okay, so the socialists fired back with a whole range of ideas. Some said, hey, why not just calculate in kind? Compare tons of steel directly to hours of labor. Others pointed to the labor theory of value, or even tried to measure something called utility, like units of happiness. The most famous idea was market socialism, where a central board would just pretend to be a market and set prices. Still others thought you could solve it all with super complex math or just good old trial and error. But for each one, Mises had a fundamental objection.
He'd say you can't add apples and oranges without a common unit like price, or that value is subjective and can't be added up, or that a pretend market doesn't solve the core problem of where to invest capital for the future. He argued none of them could work in a real, messy, constantly changing economy.
And this brings us to a really, really common mistake people make about Mises' argument. It is absolutely crucial to understand what he was claiming, and more importantly, what he was not claiming.
A lot of people hear this and think, oh, so Mises predicted the Soviet Union would collapse. Nope, not at all. His argument wasn't some prophecy about the future. It was a statement about pure logic. He was saying that without the information that comes from real market prices, rational economic planning is logically impossible. What happened to a specific country decades later was, to him, beside the point. He was making what philosophers call an apodictic claim. It's a fancy term, but all it means is that his argument was based on logic alone, kind of like a proof in geometry. It's either right or it's wrong on its own terms the moment you make it. You don't need to wait 70 years for a historical experiment to see if it holds up.
So to wrap it all up in a nutshell, Mises' big thesis wasn't that a socialist state would eventually run out of gas and collapse. It was that from the very first day, from the moment they took over, the planners would be making decisions without the most vital piece of information. They would be, in his famous phrase, economically flying in the dark, with no instruments to tell them if they were creating value or just burning through resources.
And that leaves us with a final, really fascinating question to chew on. If market prices are the absolute key to economic calculation, what happens when a planned economy exists in a world where it can just look across the border and see the prices being set in capitalist countries? Could they essentially piggyback off that information to make their own plans work? Now that is something to think about.